welcome to The Writer's Dream, a show by writers for writers. Today we're going to talk with Ellen Meister. She is the author of 3 novels, her latest being The Other Life, which was published by Putnam last year and has a very interesting premise that she's going to talk with us about today. Welcome, Ellen.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming. So tell me.
Sure. Well, The Other Life does have a much bigger, darker, and deeper premise than my previous work. And basically, it's about a woman who's aware from a very young age that every time she makes a major life decision, another reality exists in which she made the other choice. Now, in the book, she hasn't been, even though she's aware of these lives, she hasn't been tempted to slip through because she's not sure what will happen if she crosses through to the other side.
Right.
But then there's a fairly traumatic event that causes her for the first time to have so much stress that she's willing to take a look and see what's happening on the other side. And she winds up going into this other life. And she's able to cross between her 2 lives. The decision she made to get married and be with her husband and have a family. And the other life where she was single and living a much more dramatic kind of life in the city. But what really makes the emotional tug for this character is that she discovers when she goes over to the other life that her mother, who died several years ago, is alive in that life, and she's dead in this life. So that there's a great emotional tug for my character, Quinn, between the 2 lives.
I think that's interesting. That's something that I think a lot of people think about when you look back over your life and think about the choices you've made and what would have happened had I made this other choice. And here in this book, the character is able to actually see what happens.
Right, she's able to actually do that. You know, and that's sort of how the story first occurred to me. I am a mother of 3, and every day when my husband leaves for work and the kids leave for school, I have that sort of magical time alone in the house where I get to escape into this special magical world of fiction that I've created. And I was thinking about that, about the fact that it's actually an escape for me. And I thought, what if a character had a literal escape? I mean, had an actual physical portal that she could go through to the life she would have had if she didn't have all of this, if she hadn't made these choices, if she didn't have this family, this house, and all that she has here, and made the opposite choice. And it occurred to me, I pictured a portal in an actual physical space in her house, and I put it in the laundry room in the basement. I like the idea of it being in the foundation, because that felt like a sort of a neat metaphor to me, that there was an actual crack in her foundation. But I also like the fact that it was in this very, very domestic setting. So I put it behind an ancient built-in ironing board. And, you know, and it was very tricky for me because I'd never done anything before that felt like it had a paranormal element to it. And I didn't really have an interest in writing a paranormal book. What I wanted to create was a very grounded book, a very grounded story with this one sort of magical realism element. And so this was an idea, if I tell you that I lived with the idea for maybe 3 years, maybe more, really thinking about all the aspects of it, thinking about who this character was, what her conflicts were, before I sat down to start writing chapter 1. But that was the critical point, because I knew I had to sort of nail the tone and get the feeling that I wanted and see if I could do it. Can I pull this off? Can I get the reader to a place where they're going to buy this premise? And if I can do that and get the exact tone that I want, I know that I've got a book.
Now, this is your 3rd book.
This is my 3rd book.
So did you consult your agent in any way or people in the publishing business about your idea, or was this something that you felt came from you and the final decision should come from you?
You know, you might have thought I would have consulted my agents about it, but I didn't. I was so excited about the idea. And like I said, you know, the key to me was to see, could I do it and could I pull it off? And I also thought it's not the kind of thing that's going to work as well in a 5-second pitch. As it's going to work, I felt that the person really had to read the first couple of chapters to see whether anything was going to happen with it. Now, it's so different from my first 2 books, both of which, you know, definitely had some poignancy, but they were more comedic books, and they were funnier books, and they were a little lighter, and they weren't as high concept as this. I'm still proud of them, but I'm just saying they were very, very different kind of books. So I knew that my agent would be very, very surprised to see this from me. But I got to tell you, I was in love with the idea. And I felt the burning desire that I had to write this book. It was something that I had to do. So what I did was I wrote a proposal. Now, for your viewers who are sort of at the beginning of the process, the way it tends to work, at least in the commercial publishing world, your first novel, you have to write the entire book cover to cover.
Yes.
And of course, I must stress, edit it and make it as perfect as possible.
I agree.
I know that you know that. But once you've sold and published your first book, subsequent novels can be sold based on a proposal, which would be the first few chapters and an outline. That's in the commercial publishing world. Of course, it's different in self-publishing. So what I did at that point was I wrote a proposal. I wrote the first several chapters, and I wrote an outline of the rest of the book, and I sent it off to my agent, and then every single writer knows what happens next. You wait. And
yes.
It's the most horrible part of the process,
isn't it?
It is,
the waiting.
For all of us. So I waited nervously, and I didn't know what they were going to say. I didn't know if my agent would say, well, this is wonderful, but we were marketing you as a different kind of writer, and we don't know what to do. And the first words out of her mouth were, oh my God. So she loved it. She was doing backflips over it. She showed it to everybody in the agency. They were all very excited about it. And what wound up happening, and this is sort of a dream for a writer, is that it wound up selling at auction. So different editors at different publishing houses bid on the book.
That's wonderful.
And I was very excited to wind up at Putnam Berkeley.
Oh, wonderful.
So, yeah.
I would like to think that she felt your enthusiasm for the concept also. It wasn't just the premise. I think the way you wrote the opening chapters and the outline, she could feel your enthusiasm. Would you agree?
Yeah, I hope so. I think that they felt the excitement. I think the book has a certain energy to it.
Yeah.
I hope it does. But her excitement was also, a thrill to me. You really do want, your agent is your advocate.
I know.
So you want to feel that kind of energy and enthusiasm from them as well, and that's a great feeling.
I agree. I have an agent as well, and she said to me once, if you're wearing a shirt that you really like, you feel good about it, but if someone else tells you that shirt is great, you feel even better about that shirt. It's the same idea with something you've written. That's
true.
Yeah.
Especially, as writers, I've never met a writer who's 100% confident.
Oh.
We all have a ton of insecurity.
Oh, sure.
So it's very easy for us to feel knocked down. So when you get that sort of, confirmation that you did something right, it's, it really buoys your spirits and helps you to keep going.
Oh, I agree.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that you, for this third book, you created that outline. And also for your second book, I'm assuming you created the proposal with the outline.
Right.
Now, do you normally, like say for your first book, when you're writing for the first time, let's say when you have an idea for a book, where does it go from there? You have this wonderful idea that would make a great book.
Right.
What do you do next?
Well, the first thing I usually do is think about it for a long while before anything goes on paper. So, there aren't that many quiet moments in my life. So it's usually when I'm driving that a lot of the ideas work themselves out. So I think about it and I concentrate on it. The next thing that happens, I don't do anything formal. I start making notes. I put myself in a chair. I open up a Word document. And I start, it's almost a stream of consciousness. Here's where I see this story going. Here are some thoughts about the character. It's literally like thinking, but I'm doing it on paper. I have this theory that we use a different part of our brain when we write than when we simply sit and think, or even when we talk. So I think that you're tapping into a different place in your brain, a different type of energy. So I start making notes. And from there, I start making a very loose outline. And there usually comes a point during that loose outlining process where I say to myself, you know what, at this point, I have to see if this is going to work. I have to find this book's voice. I have to find this book's pacing. So at that point, I put it aside, and it's usually not anything in any way formal at that point, the outline. It's very loose and it's very rough. And I start writing 1 or 2 chapters. And at that point, I start getting more of an idea of the shape the book is going to take, and then I can start being a little bit more specific with my outline. But keep in mind, when I write an outline, it is always an organic, living document. I don't adhere to it that strictly.
Right.
It's more like this very rough roadmap that shows me, because I know when I start a novel, I always know where I want it to end. if not in a very concrete story way, I know where I want it to end in terms of my character's arc.
I completely agree.
Right. So I always think your character has to have an inner journey and an outer journey.
Yes.
So I know where I want to deliver the character to.
Right.
It's that pesky, middle point from chapter 1 to the end that creates problems. So I will do what I call a broad strokes outline. And then as I write the book, I start to consider it a fluid document, because what happens is you start to know your character much more as you write the book.
Exactly.
That's right. As much planning as you do, the character starts to reveal itself as the chapters progress. You might even change your mind a little bit as you go along about exactly who you want this person to be. And then suddenly you find yourself at a point that in your outline where you thought your character was going to do a certain thing or behave in a certain way, and you get to that point and you say, it no longer feels natural to me. It seemed natural when I wrote the outline. Now if I do it, I'm going to be forcing it. And you never want to force it.
I agree.
Because if it feels like it's forcing it to you, the reader is going to sense that as well. So that's the point at which you say, okay, I'm going to be true to the character, and I just have to go back to the outline and revisit it and sort of move things around and shuffle things and see how it's going to shake out. So I outline, but there's also an organic part of the process.
So when you're first outlining, are you creating these also backstories and histories for your characters, or are you sort of just taking it from where the story starts forward?
I always have some sort of backstory and history for the characters. It's important for me to know. It may or may not go in the book, but it helps me figure out who they are and what their motivations are. And I think that all writers should keep that in mind. Your character has a history.
Right.
Your character didn't start the day that you wrote chapter 1.
Right.
So yeah, I think that's important. I know some writers have these elaborate profiles that they actually write out where the character went to school and what their favorite breakfast cereal is. I don't necessarily, go into that sort of written detail. But in my head, I know who they are. I know what they do for a living, or what they did for a living, or what they were like as children. So I do have all that sort of background in my head.
And I would also think writing an outline eases the ability to start writing that chapter 1. I have so many writer friends who they're sitting at a blank screen that says chapter 1, and they've got the shakes. I even know writers who actually just start with chapter 2 because chapter 1 is so daunting.
Right.
But with your process, you've really done a lot of the legwork ahead of time. You're sort of familiar with your story by outlining that. I would think it's easier to start writing.
Right, it is easier to start writing. And like I said, I do look at the outline as a very fluid document. So I don't feel I absolutely have to stick to this. It helps to have it.
It helps, right.
But, right. And I keep working on the outline as I go along. Right. That's critical. And honestly, for me, and it's so funny because my agent said to me, you're a really strong story person. And I said, I am? Because for me, I don't think of myself as a strong story person, only because it's so hard for me. I think the story is the hardest part of the process. To me, the paragraphs, the sentences, the chapters, the scenes, the characters, the dialogue, that's the part that, I'm not going to say any of it is easy, but that's easier.
Right.
For me, the story part is always the trickiest, because that's like fitting the pieces of a puzzle together. And, I'm a firm believer that a novel should feel to a reader like a journey. So I'm dedicated to taking them on a ride that feels like I'm delivering them to a destination. So that's why it's really critical for me to have a cohesive story. I want my readers to feel satisfied in the end. Even if the story is open-ended, even if the story doesn't necessarily have a happy ending, it has to feel like a destination. It has to feel like there was a reason for this ride.
Right.
So
now, when do you tend to write? I know you've got so much going on. You teach at Hofstra University on the weekends. You've got children. I tend to write in the very early morning. I actually set my clock for 2 a.m. and I will get up to write because I like the quiet.
Right.
There's no distractions. I mean, do you have what is your process? Do you have a certain time you like to write? Do you do it when it just hits you, the whim? I mean,
first of all, I love that you get up at 2 a.m. because you're the first person I've met who actually sets the alarm before me. Because when I tell people I get up at 5 a.m. to write, they usually gasp. So yes, I'm absolutely an early morning person.
Me too.
Early morning and coffee. That's always critical for me. Yes, when I first started my first novel, my children were pretty small, and my little one wasn't yet in school full time. And I had just gotten this bug where I decided to pursue. It had been a lifelong dream for me, incidentally. I mean, I was an English major in college, and people said, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to be a teacher? And I said, no, I'm going to be a novelist. But as my career, I was in marketing, I was a copywriter,
Right.
and I did that sort of thing. And I managed to procrastinate pursuing my dream for many, many years. And then I just, woke up one morning and had one of those mortality moments when I said, this ride doesn't last forever. And if this is something I've always wanted to do, I've got to find the time to do it.
Yep.
And my life doesn't get less busy, it gets more busy.
Sure does.
So I said, when do I have time to do this with, such a busy life and 3 kids and everybody's very demanding? And I said, if I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and I work every day for 2 hours before the children get up, before the family awakes, then I can do this. And that was exactly what I did. And my first novel was written between the hours of 5 and 7 over a 2-year period.
Wow.
And, to this day, and now my children are older, and of course everybody's in school or out and about and doing their own thing. And I do have daytime hours in which I can work, and I do. There is nothing to me like those early morning hours. It's a very magical time. My focus is different. My concentration is different. And I even think my imagination is different. I think that you're still tapping into some of your subconscious, and there's this little, twilighty bit of your brain that's still turned on in those early morning hours. And it's just sort of a magical, imaginative time for me. So it's critical. I need those hours to work. And interestingly, and I'm a morning person. I think biologically, some people are morning people, some people are evening people. I cannot write a coherent sentence after the sun sets, literally. I always say I lose 1 IQ point for every hour of the day. So I literally can't write in the evening. And I know that some people do it, some busy people who are working or taking care of children, they say, okay, when the house is quiet, everybody goes to sleep, the sun sets, that's when I sit down and write. I can't do it. So, and I'm just really must stress, there's no right and wrong. Everybody has to do
whatever feels right to them.
What works for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So take me back to that first novel. So here we are 2 years later, from 5 to 7 a.m. You've been working on this thing.
Right.
It's done.
Right.
What did you do? Because at that point, you had no contacts in the industry, I assume, or...
No real contacts in the industry. Nobody that was going to, say, here, let me introduce you to my agent. But, what I had done at that point, now when I started writing my first book, which Secret Confessions of the Applewood PTA, which actually the previous title was George Clooney is Coming to Applewood, but we had to change it.
Oh, no.
I know. I love that original title. But so...
Can I ask why you had to change it?
The legal
thing?
It's legal stuff.
Okay.
Legal stuff. So, unfortunately, that's the way it goes.
Right. He's sorry now, though,
so,
right?
Oh, I'm sure. I'll tell you just an interesting side story before I tell you about the process. One of the first things I did when I actually got the printed books was I inscribed one for George Clooney. And I wrote in it, Dear George, this book might just put you on the map. You're welcome, Ellen Meister. And I sent it off to him. Still haven't heard, no phone calls, no letters, no invitations to his villa in Tuscany. So I'm still waiting. It could happen, right?
Sure.
So anyway, so I finished writing it, but when I first started, I was in a vacuum. I didn't know any other writers. I felt very, very removed and very isolated. And I went online and I tried to find other writers to connect with. And the first thing I did, and this was, the internet was not as prevalent and social. There weren't the social networks
social media,
that there are today. So I found some website where some people posted ads that they were looking for crit pals. And most of them were 16-year-olds, and, it didn't seem like it would be a good fit for me. But I did find one woman who seemed like she could write, and she seemed mature, and she was looking for a crit pal. And it was very interesting, and she was a writer. She was a woman living in rural Georgia, and she was a truck driver.
Oh, wow.
And here I was, a middle-class Jewish woman from Long Island, and I had a new best friend. And this, God bless the internet, because
I know.
Where else can you find that you have so much in common with somebody from such a different lifestyle? We became best friends immediately and really helped each other out tremendously, sending chapters back and forth. So she was my first crit pal. Then I wound up joining a website, really a short story workshopping website, zoetrope.com.
Mm-hmm. That's Francis Ford Coppola, isn't that
That's
his?
right,
Yeah.
that's right. There's a lot of different wings to the website. Unfortunately, it's not as dynamic as it once was, because once all the other social media sites got up and coming, people sort of disappear from it. But at the time, it was incredibly vibrant. So I was writing short stories, I was workshopping them, I was meeting other writers, and I was learning how hard, nearly impossible it was to get a literary agent. But I understood that what I was up against, which was important, because you have to know how challenging it's going to be. And then I started writing those query letters and getting rejections. And I would say it was, 2 years to write the book, and 9 months of sending queries and getting rejections before I got that phone call from an agent who was absolutely over the moon in love with the book.
I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
You have to find someone who has a passion for that book as much as you do.
She loved the book. She requested a rewrite, and I did that a couple of times. And I would say probably about 6 months later, there was an offer from HarperCollins. It was the Morrow Avon imprint of HarperCollins. And yeah, the rest is history.
The rest is history.
Yeah.
And I would assume then at that point it gets easier as for the second book to, you already have the agent or the contact.
Yeah, it's never easy. I just do want to stress that. There's nothing about this business that's ever easy. Yeah. Well, what's easier is that, contractually the editor is going to, have first crack at your next book, the editor who published the first one. So at that point, yes, you're connected. I mean, I certainly didn't have to go find an agent. I was with my agent.
Right.
And she showed it to my editor. And if the editor hadn't liked the book, they certainly would have worked with me to find, something else, to find another project to work on. Because they're invested in you and they want you to succeed. And so yes, from that point, it is different. And fortunately, she loved the idea for the next book too, which is called The Smart One, and that's a sister story. So then the same publisher published the second book. And as I said, when this one came along, it wound up selling at auction. So I'm with a different house now.
And I know who absolutely loved this book too, HBO, which picked it up.
Optioned the book for a TV series.
How wonderful is that?
Yeah.
Cue confetti, I think I read on your website.
that was an incredibly exciting phone call to get from my agent.
The Holy Grail.
The Holy Grail. I mean, I love HBO. And,
Me too.
the way it works is that your literary agent doesn't tend to sell to Hollywood because it's a very different set of rules, different set of contacts. So most literary agents have some Hollywood agents that they deal with. So if the literary agent thinks a book has a chance, they show it to a Hollywood agent, and then the Hollywood agent may or may not take it on. Just like a literary agent may or may not take on a book. They have to decide that it's filmic and it's something that they can probably sell. And at that point in the process, the writer is extremely removed. I did not know what was going on, who it was being shown to. It was just this thing that happened on the other coast, and I just, went about my business and worked on my next project and waited to hear. And then when my agent called and said, I have some exciting news, and there was a pause, and she said HBO, and then I just started to scream. I don't think I heard the rest of what she said.
Oh my goodness.
So so that was pretty exciting. But now I'm, sort of looking toward my next book and
tell us about it.
hoping that Hollywood comes a calling for that. Because as much as we all love books and we love writing, that's always getting those Hollywood deals is always, because there's
who doesn't love the movies?
We all love the movies. It's exciting to see your work come to life, and it's also exciting to have the extra money, because as we know, there's not a lot in publishing.
Oh, right.
So Hollywood has a few more bucks than the publishing world has.
Now your next book is called Farewell, Dorothy Parker.
Farewell, Dorothy Parker, and that's coming out from Putnam in 2013.
Oh, wonderful.
And I'll tell a little bit about the genesis of that idea, because I've been a Dorothy Parker fan since I was in high school. Dorothy Parker was a writer of short stories, poems, reviews, and essays in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s. She passed away in the 1960s, and she was very famous for being a member of the Algonquin Round Table and being a famous American wit. And so, like I said, I've been a fan of hers forever. And I was looking at all the books that were published that paid tribute to Jane Austen. Now, I'm a big Jane Austen fan, and I think that that's terrific, and I've read a number of them. But as I was thinking about the phenomenon that it's almost exclusively Jane Austen, you don't really see other authors being treated this way, I thought, God, somebody should do that for Dorothy Parker. And then I thought, what, me? That was the next thought. The third thought was, are you kidding? Who do you think you are? But I was so excited by the thought that I said, I got to give this a shot. And I immediately had the idea of how it was going to play out, which was that the main character was going to be a timid woman movie critic, a contemporary woman, who channeled Dorothy Parker when she wrote her reviews, but in her real life she was so timid and so fearful that it really held her back, and it cost her in her life. So she really needed Dorothy Parker's strength.
That's interesting. It's similar to The Other Life in a sense, where that double life thing going on.
Similar to The Other Life in that there is something, well, it's a grounded story with this sort of magical realism element. And then without getting into the conceit and how I worked it out, the ghost of Dorothy Parker winds up taking up residence in her home and becoming her mentor and causing almost as much trouble as she solves.
Oh my goodness, it sounds wonderful.
Thank you. I'm pretty excited about it. It's all written, but so it'll be coming out sometime next year. We don't have a pub date yet.
Oh my God, I can't wait to read it. I have actually a slew of other questions that I would love to ask you, but we're running out of time. Would you maybe come back for another show in the future?
I would be thrilled.
That would be wonderful. Ellen, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me, Dina.
And thank you for joining us today on The Writer's Dream. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.